I have seldom been able to resist the allurement of a bookstore, particularly one that is well supplied with rare and exotic items. Therefore I turned in at Toloman's to browse around for a few minutes. I had come to San Francisco for one of my brief biannual visits, and had started early that idle forenoon to an appointment with Cyprian Cincoul, the sculptor, a second or third cousin of mine, whom I had not seen for several years.
Greetings friends, and welcome to Season 2 Episode 14 of Strange Shadows, where we're working through the weird fiction of Clark Ashton Smith story by story, using the excellent 5-volume Nightshade book series as our guide. The voice you just heard was Shelley Cruz of Graveheart Designs, reading the opening of today's story. I'm one of your hosts, Rob Hoyton.
And I'm the other one, Tim Mendes.
So we've come to the last story in Volume 2, and what a cracking one to end the season on. It's The Hunters from Beyond. And shall we start with our favourite words?
Indeed, yeah, why not? Right, yeah, the first one I've got here is equipoise, which is a situation where things are perfectly balanced.
Ah, nice.
I thought, to me, it sounded equestrian. I don't know why. I was thinking horses, you know.
Yeah. I was sort of thinking of those. Was that the Lipizzaner horses? The Spanish ones who move with that sort of, what would you call it, poise, I suppose.
Yeah, well, the dressage stuff, and all that.
Yeah. My first word is atelier, which is a French word and simply means studio or workshop.
Nice. Well, I've got that down as well. It's also a console RPG series based around alchemy.
Oh,
so there you go.
I didn't know that.
A bit of useless trivia for you.
Have you played it?
No, I haven't. No, I've never heard of it until this morning when I looked it up, and I'm going to have to go and have a look at it now. Yeah, the next one I've got is sophistries, which is the use of clever but false arguments in order to deceive.
Oh, very nice, very nice. Now, my next one is not a word, but it's 2 words, a phrase, because there are a couple of phrases that really stood out for me in this story. And one that I really liked was tonsured a gnome.
Nice.
I just thought that was
nice.
Great. And a tonsure, of course, is that monk haircut where they have the sort of fringe of hair around the edge, but the top of the head is bald. That's a tonsure. I'm not sure why they do that or what the origin of that is.
No idea.
I've never known. Perhaps one of our listeners will let us know. Yeah, because normally with religious people, you see Orthodox people of most faiths, it's normally very sort of beardy and long hair, isn't it?
That's true. Yeah.
I wonder what the origin of the tonsure was.
Yeah, my next one is nympholepsy. You knew that was coming, didn't you?
I knew, yeah, because I had it as well. Yeah.
Which it comes from ancient Greece. It means to be possessed by nymphs, and in a frenzy of emotion.
Oh.
The nice euphemism there.
Lusty.
Lusty.
Yeah, there's quite a modern use of that as well in, is it Nabokov? Nabokov's Lolita. The lead character describes himself as a nympholet, one who is attracted to young ladies. So, well, I don't think we need to say any more about that.
No, I don't think we do.
But, we do know another word for that begins with N as well, don't we?
Yes.
It's come up a few times.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. Isn't there a fort called it as well?
So my next word is one that I had to look up, not at all familiar with this. And the meaning sort of surprised me. The meaning doesn't seem to correlate to what the word sounds like it should mean.
Yeah.
And the word is animadversions, which simply means criticism.
Yeah, it's one of those archaic terms. I think I was disappointed because I looked that one up as well, and I was like, that's a bit...
Yeah.
It's one of those lovely archaic words, I think.
Yeah.
My final one is one we've had before, but it's so nice we'll have it twice. It's adumbration.
Nice.
Which can either mean represent in outline, or it can also mean foreshadow or overshadow. In this context, is foreshadow.
Yes, indeed, yes. And my final word is toque, which is a type of brimless hat or cap. It looks very much to me like what we used to call a bobble hat, We used to have that sort of the knitted cap with the bobble on the top, that kind of thing. That's a toque.
You say toque to a Mancunian, they pass you a joint. Gives a toque on that. Gives a toque on that, pal.
Quite a different meaning. I'd like to think that Smith was aware of that. I'm not sure that he would have been, but it's like because he would have.
Hashish eater.
Oh well, yeah, exactly. I think he would have had some experience of that, wouldn't he? I heard a thing from a comedian the other day. He said, "Yeah, I experimented with drugs at college, but I didn't exhale."
That's a good one.
Nice.
I like that. That's a good one.
Let's move on to our publication history then, and I'm going to take a wild guess. I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say that Mr. Wright said no.
Well, yes, you will be absolutely correct in that. We'll get there. Yeah, Smith finished the story on the 28th of April 1931. He was actually working on The Holiness of Azadrach at the time, but he paused work on it to pen Hunters with a view to flogging it to a new magazine, which was Harry Bates's Strange Tales. Now, this new magazine was quite an attractive alternative to Weird Tales because it paid an extra cent per word upon publication. So for somebody who was always in a state of pecuniary depletion, like Mr. Smith was, you can imagine it's quite an attractive prospect.
Indeed.
Oddly, though, considering that it is one of my favourites of Smith's work, I love this story, Smith wasn't a fan of it. He said to Derleth that it was probably junk. And he said in another letter to Derleth that it doesn't please me very well. The integral mood seems a bit second-rate, probably because the modern treatment is rather uncongenial for me. Now, I thought this was interesting because this echoes what we've said before about Clark Asher's Smith being less into the modern setting or the futuristic setting stuff.
Yeah.
He seems to be more into the fantastical settings.
Yeah. It feels like he saves his most purple prose for Avaroyan and Hyperborea and Zothique, doesn't he?
Yeah, and so I thought that was really interesting to actually see that kind of almost confirmed in a way.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, August Derleth disagreed. He really liked it. He thought it was really good. And he went as far as to suggesting some revisions, basically mostly pertaining to the end of it. Yeah, he said this in one of his letters. The tale is good as it stands, and I like it. The end I just found a little weak. It's if you've got up some morning and said, now I must write a story and evolve this, and then got tired of it near the end. Now, Smith thanked August Derleth for the thing and all the rest of it, but because he wasn't a massive fan of the story at this point, he basically just was like, he replied saying, good, but I'm none too fond of the story and shan't feel like reworking any of it if I can sell it anywhere as it stands. I have other ideas that interest me more, which is, fair enough.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was rejected by Strange Tales.
Right.
He then subbed it to Ghost Stories, who rejected it, and Weird Tales, who, as you quite rightly surmised, rejected it.
Oh, my God. 3 out of 3.
Yeah.
That's bad.
We have another classic Farnsworth Wright quote here. Wright wrote saying, "It lacks the convincingness of most of your stories. It's not nearly as convincing or thrilling, for instance, as Lovecraft's Pickman's Model, to mention a story of similar theme."
Right. It was interesting that he picked up that because obviously there are parallels.
Oh, absolutely. Well, to me, it's basically two stories in smushed together, but we'll get there. So after these rejections, Smith did make some revisions along the lines that Derleth suggested, but pertaining to the ending. He basically changed the ending. It's a shame we don't have that original version because I'd like to know precisely what was changed.
Yeah, being always interesting to see, isn't it, how these things are revised? Yeah.
After the revisions, Smith basically changed his mind about the story. He liked it after this.
Right.
He changed his mind. He wrote to August Derleth saying, "The Hunters look pretty good when I read over it the other day, and I think I prefer it to the Hemlin Carnby thing now, though I didn't at first. which is interesting. He elaborated on it later, explaining that my preference for The Hunters from Beyond is based on its style too. I agree that Carnby has a more original plot, but it seems to need some additional atmospheric development. There's something I will say, but one of the things I love about Hunters is the atmosphere of it. Yeah. It's got that dread all the way through it, hasn't it? It's same as Pickman's model. You've got that sort of unease all the way through it.
Oh, yeah. Totally, yeah.
Well, Bates accepted the revised work, and it was eventually published in his intended magazine of choice, Strange Tales, in the October 1932 issue. So all's well that's end well, basically.
He got there in the end.
Yeah, he got there in the end. So he got his extra cent per word. So, it's cool. Yeah.
And the story made the cover of that edition as well. This is that quite famous Smith cover. I think most people know this. It's the white creature, that sort of wormy, puffy-looking thing peering around the bookcase at Hastane.
Yeah.
I don't know who the artist is. I can't think of who
I haven't a clue.
No, perhaps if one of our listeners knows who the artist is, they could let us know. We always like to credit artists where we can.
Yeah. Yeah, now something else I discovered while I was digging into this is that it appears that the story may have been inspired by an actual experience that occurred while Smith was suffering from an attack of tuberculosis.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah, in 1918, apparently. He wrote in the November 1934 issue of The Fantasy Fan, which is a fanzine. But he basically described this experience. So I'm just going to read you this little excerpt here. About 1918, I was in ill health, and during a short visit to San Francisco, was sitting one day in the Bohemian Club, to which I had been given a guest's card of admission. Happening to look up, I saw a frightful demonian face with twisted root-like eyebrows and oblique, fiery slitted eyes, which seemed to emerge momentarily from the air about 9 feet above me and lean towards my seat. The thing disappeared as it approached me, but left an ineffaceable impression of malignity, horror, and loathsomeness. If a hallucination, it was certainly seen amid appropriate surroundings. If an actual entity, it was no doubt the kind that would be likely to haunt a club in one of our modern Gomorrahs.
Ah, that is interesting.
Yeah. Isn't it?
Because I don't know with Smith, if we ever really get what his view on the supernatural was. I mean, with Lovecraft, we're hit over the head
yeah,
quite repeatedly. But with Smith, it seems less clear. Maybe that's something we could delve into in the letters. Perhaps there's writings about his views in those. That could be an interesting topic to look at for a bonus episode. Because he does say there, if it's a hallucination or if it is an actual entity.
Yeah.
So it seems that he's open to the possibility of that actually being something real and not just some sort of a fever dream or whatever.
Yeah, so I thought it was a really interesting little passage, that. So,
yeah. All right, so let's move into the story. And as we heard at the start there, it's a contemporary setting. We're in contemporary San Francisco. And we're introduced to a character who we've met before, Philip Hastane. And we've seen him before in The Devotee of Evil and City of the Singing Flame. And he's also going to be appearing in some further stories in the future as well. In fact, I think he's in about 4 or 5 stories overall.
Yeah, I think he is. He's basically Smith's Carter, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because, again, he is kind of like a cipher, because he's a writer of weird fiction and all that.
Oh, totally, yeah. I think he even lives in a cabin in Auburn, doesn't he?
Yeah, yes, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so this is really the closest Smith came to a recurring character. So, yeah, in the same vein as Lovecraft's Carter, as you said, but not really anything like a Robert E. Howard character, like a Solomon Kane or something like a Kanaki, that kind of character.
No.
And I feel that we don't really get to know much about Hastane. We don't really get much of his background. There's not a lot of character about him. It's more like seeing the story through his eyes. Yeah.
Well, I think that's where, Carter we know a bit more about because of Dream Quest, right?
Yeah.
But to begin with, it was exactly the same, wasn't it? He was just a name that things happened to. you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and while we're just quickly on the subject of his name, it's like, again, I'm just completely struck by how it's a merging of basically Chambers and Bierce, isn't it? Because Castaigne and Haster.
All right.
You know?
Oh, I never picked up on that.
Yes, you got that. You got that King in Yellow reference already, and that's one of, as I mentioned, this is basically like, to me, it's two different stories kind of put together. It's the story, the yellow sign, and obviously Pickman's model.
Pickman's model. So. Yeah. Wow, that's a very good observation. Yeah. The only thing I could find out about the word Hastain is that it's Turkish for a hospital or similar building.
Is it really?
Yeah, apparently. I can't think of any connection there, but
that's interesting. Yeah.
Now we do get some other names in this opening section as well, and the first is Tolmans or Tolmans, which is the name of the bookshop, this rare bookshop that is featured in the story. I've not been able to find any trace of this at all at any time in San Francisco, so I don't know if it was a real bookshop at the time or not, if Smith just invented the name. Perhaps, again, one of our listeners will have information on that and can let us know.
Mm-hmm.
We then get the name of the person that Hastain has come to San Francisco to meet. His cousin, I think it's described as a second or third cousin, Cyprian Sincool.
Yeah.
Smith likes his odd names, doesn't he? He never goes for like a Fred Brown or something. Always an unusual name.
It's a good name, that. Yeah.
Now, Cyprian, as you might gather, just refers to someone from Cyprus. And the most famous Cyprian I've been able to find is Saint Cyprian, who was the Bishop of Carthage until his untimely death by execution in the year 258. He was executed under the orders of the Emperor Valerian, who at the time was persecuting Christians. Cyprian was of Berber heritage. I can't really find any connection with this story. He was someone who was quite outspoken against Rome at the time, and I guess he eventually paid the price for that. The surname Sincaul, Sincaul, I'm not being able to find any information on that at all, so it seems like it's not even a proper name. Maybe it's just something that Smith made up.
Yeah, could just be as simple as putting sin and call together.
Yeah, could just be that, yeah. So those are the names we get at the start of the story. And as I said, we're in this bookshop, this rare and occult bookshop, which I have to say sounds like our sort of place, the sort of place I love to find and go and have a good browse around.
Oh, I do. I try whenever I go to a new town or village or whatever, and there's a bookshop, specifically those really old ones. It's like there's a great one in Eastbourne, right? It's on like 3 floors, and to get around it, you need mountaineering equipment. It's all piles up to the ceiling and all this kind of stuff, right?
Nice.
It's like because my partner goes over there to have her hair done, so I leave her in the hairdresser, and I'll go rummaging around this bookshop for hours, right?
Nice. Yeah, there's one or two in Cambridge still like that.
Yeah, I went in one of them. The Haunted Bookshop is one.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, the Haunted Bookshop. Always good for a browse. And there's another one I really like down in Plymouth when we go down to visit the in-laws. I always go into. And it's that exact same thing again. It's on 3 or 4 floors, windy little stairs. You have to leave your bag at the desk.
Yeah, that's it.
Downstairs. Yeah. And the shelves, it's all quite tight. You almost have to go sideways to get in between the shelves. Absolutely packed with stuff.
Yeah. Is that down near the Barbican? I think I know it.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because I used to live out that way, so yeah, I know it.
Right. Yeah, great little place and a nice little bit of town that to poke around as well. Very interesting. In fact, I think I did an intimate excursion there the last time I was down. That is up on YouTube. Anyway, back to our San Francisco bookshop, and Hastain is having a browse around. He's basically killing time because he's very early for the meeting with his cousin. And we get this I really liked. Knowing my proclivities, the owner and his one assistant became tacitly non-attentive after a word of recognition and left me to rummage at will among the curiously laden shelves. Isn't that nice? They know him, so they just let him get on with it. You don't get this thing, you go in the shop, can I help you, sir? And they sort of hover around. I don't know about you. I find that really off-putting.
Oh, it does my head in. I hate it when I go in shops and they're like, "Can I help you?" Yeah, you can go away. That'd be a big help.
Well, especially in bookshops, which are made for browsing.
Yeah, yeah. I get in record shops as well. There's nothing worse than some spod saying, "Can I help you today?" Probably not. No, you probably have no idea what I'm looking for.
I bet you're looking for sort of purple vinyl Christian death.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm looking for rare psychic TV bootleg live albums.
Oh, nice, nice. So he's having a good old rummage around, and it doesn't find anything particularly interesting until he comes across this collection of prints by Goya, which he calls Proverbs. So this was a series of prints made between 1815 and 23, when Goya was still living in Spain. They were 25 originally, but only 22 remain. They were called the Proverbs or the Follies, and they're a sort of set of prints. No one's really quite sure what they're about. They're thought to refer to perhaps some old Spanish proverbs, perhaps there's some political satire or meaning in them, but they're that typical Goya, very dark, very dreamlike. And when he moved to France in 1824, he left this collection in Madrid. We'll put a link up to them there. Well, it's Goya, right? It's going to be interesting.
A bit disturbing, yeah. I like Goya. I like Goya's work. But it is very unsettling.
Yeah. He really captured something odd, didn't he, in his work?
He did.
Yeah, and of course it's interesting to compare this to Pickman, who we mentioned earlier. But also, of course, this leads us into Cyprian, who is another artist, is a sculptor.
Yeah.
But Hastain's browsing of the Goya is suddenly interrupted by a very strange and singular vision. What I saw was a forward-slouching, vermin-grey figure, wholly devoid of hair or down or bristles, but marked with faint etiolated rings like those of a serpent that has lived in darkness. It possessed the head and brow of an anthropoid ape, a semi-canine mouth and jaw, and arms ending in twisted hands whose black hyena talons nearly scraped the floor. The thing was infinitely bestial and at the same time macabre, for its parchment skin was shriveled, corpse-like, mummified in a manner impossible to convey.
Yeah, instantly you get thoughts of the ghouls from Pickman's model, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
With the talons and the mottled skin.
The canines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he carries on now. It's like, from eye sockets well nigh deep as those of a skull, there glimmered evil slits of yellowish phosphorescence, like burning sulphur. Fangs that were stained as if with poison or gangrene issued from the slavering, half-open mouth, and the whole attitude of the creature was that of some maleficent monster in readiness to spring. Yeah, it really does remind me of that sort of closing of Pickman's model, when he sees the ghoul, he describes the ghoul.
Yeah, and it's that real predatory aspect that comes across in it, I think.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And we mentioned earlier this idea that we're not really sure what Smith's views on the supernatural were, but perhaps given that this is based on his experience and the fact that Hastain is in many ways Smith himself, we get this comment, which is interesting. Though I had been for years a professional writer of stories that often dealt with occult phenomena, with the weird and the spectral, I was not at this time possessed of any clear and settled belief regarding such phenomena. I had never before seen anything that I could identify as a phantom, nor even an hallucination, and I should have hardly said offhand that a bookstore on a busy street in full summer daylight was the likeliest of places in. But the thing before me was assuredly nothing that could ever exist among the permissible forms of a sane world. So again, there's that implication that, yeah, this could be hallucination, but there's also room for it to be real.
Yeah.
Is not sort of setting down on one side or the other.
Yeah, I love this sequence now. This is an incredibly unsettling sequence because how he describes its movement and everything. It's that thing they do now in horror movies where the thing will just sort of jump, like
right.
there's, it'll just sort of appear closer.
Yeah.
They do it in a lot in horror games, and it always makes me like, make a really, really like, ooh, kind of noise, like a wounded warthog or something stupid. Even as I stared across the Goya, sick with half incredulous fear, the apparition moved towards me. I say that it moved, but its change of position was so instantaneous, so utterly without effort or visible transition, that the verb is hopelessly inadequate. The foul spectre had seemed 5 or 6 feet away, but now it was stooping directly above the volume that I still held in my hands, with its loathsomely lambent eyes peering upward at my face, and a green-grey slime drooling from its mouth onto the broad pages. That's creepy. That is a creepy sequence.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. It's a good jump scare as well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I like the alliteration here, loathsomely lambent. That's nice, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that sort of movement, that's really interesting because it's not like an animal or anything. It's just that shift. And I think, like you said, we see that in horror films and games now, but I wonder if that was quite new at the time, that sort of idea or that way of moving.
Yeah, but there's no movement. It just suddenly, it's like blink and it's there in front of your face. It's incredibly like another example is one of my favorite versions of that is in the Our Lady of Darkness.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah,
they just sort of move that thing just sort of jumps around the place, doesn't it? It's very unsettling.
Yeah, because as I said, it's obviously not human because of what it looks like, but you might think, well, it's got fangs, it's got claws, it's an animal. But it doesn't move like any type of animal either. It's almost, it's like it's not of this world or not of this plane, not of this dimension, maybe.
Yeah, because it's almost like it fades in and out of reality, isn't it? Yeah. It's almost like it portals towards you, kind of thing. It's why, like reading this again, I'm surprised that this has not been adapted, because this one, to me, would be a perfect adaptation for something like Cabinet of Curiosities, although they'd probably make a hash of it, but that's by and by.
Thank heaven for small mercies.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? I mean, because it's all there. Like the jump scares are set up.
Yeah, well, it's got everything in that respect, isn't it? You've got, it's quite a small cast, so you don't need a big budget, you don't need a big cast. Everything is contained nicely. You've got a female interest in it. 2 locations that you can make really nice and creepy with the right dressing. Yeah. And like you say, you've got all these jump scares and everything else built in, so it would seem an ideal one to adapt, Not unnaturally, this vision creates a response to Stain. That's what you say, he jumps a bit. And he drops the book with a resonant bang on the floor. And the vision vanishes. And we get this response from Mr. Tollerman, the book owner. One imagines at the sight of seeing his rare Goya book hit the deck. What is wrong, Mr. Hustain? Are you ill? Tollerman, a tonsured gnome with shell-rimmed goggles, had rushed forward to retrieve the fallen volume. From the meticulousness with which he examined the binding in search of possible damage, I knew that his chief solicitude was concerning the Goya. So that's nice, isn't it? You break it, you pay for it, basically.
Yeah. I like the fact that he ends up buying it out of apology. But that's a very British thing to do, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
If you knock something off the shelf, you end up putting it in your basket. Why? I don't know. But
Oh, I know. Not even that. Sometimes you go into a sort of small shop, a little independent trader, and they start chatting to you, and you have a good chat. You feel obliged to buy something.
I'm better buying something.
You come out with something you didn't even want, probably.
I'm glad I'm not alone in that. That's why I take Linda in when I'm doing things like that. Yeah. Well, it happens to me in things like I went in the off license yesterday. It was one I've never been in before. It's one of these fancy wine places. I wanted a bottle of wine to go with a dinner. And I walked in, and because the guy started talking to me, I ended up having to buy a bottle, even though they didn't have what I wanted.
And I think this is something that Smith is really good at. These little touches, they don't advance the plot at all. If they weren't in there, you wouldn't really miss them in that sense. Yet they're sort of real life, They ground us in reality.
Absolutely.
And they're just such nice little observances of human nature, I think.
Yeah. It's something we picked up on before in Smith, the little details the mundanities of existence almost, that give it that kind of reality. I think they ground the story, even though they're talking about like portals to other dimensions and weird protoplasmic monsters with 15 eyes and a tentacle, but because they put in these sort of mundane little bits in there, it grounds it to a degree.
Now, the book owner and the assistant show no signs of having seen this vision, which, as we said, had disappeared. Oh, he did notice a horrible smell with this as well. I thought that was nice because it's not just a visual apparition or manifestation, but it's olfactory as well. So, we're hitting all the senses. So Hastane pays for the book, rushes out of the shop, and I think he's in a bit of what they might call at the time a funk.
I like the fact that he makes a point of saying that he'd never used narcotic drugs nor abused alcohol, and as far as he knew, his nerves were in sound condition. So, basically he does that thing where he's trying to sort of rationalize it out, isn't he? And he's saying it could be some obscure cerebral disorder, or he could have been visited by a spectral phenomenon. So there is that element of doubt, which I thought was a nice touch.
Yeah, which ties exactly back to that experience you mentioned before.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there was another word I liked here as well. I tried to argue with myself to convince the rational part of my mind that the apparition had been the product of some evanescent trick of light and shade. Evanescent. Nice.
I can't help thinking of that god-awful new metal band from the early 2000s now, Evanescence.
yeah, not my cup of tea either. But
no.
Hastane makes his way to his cousin's studio, but he's still feeling the effects of this apparition, so he walks around the block a few times to try and clear his head. But he also thinks that going to see his cousin's work is going to help calm him down as well, because we get this quite sort of biting comment, I suppose, on Cyprian sculptures. It occurred to me that the unimaginative portrait busts and tamely symbolic figure groups of Cyprian Singhal might serve admirably to soothe my shaken nerves. Even his grotesques would seem sane and ordinary by comparison with the blasphemous gargoyle that had drooled before me in the bookshop. So this idea that his cousin's sculptures are so bland are going to sort of help calm him down a bit.
You actually mentioned that back in the first paragraph. He said that Cyprian had offered to show me his collection of recent sculptures, but remembering the smooth mediocrity of his former work, amid which there were a few banal efforts to achieve horror and grotesquerie, I did not anticipate anything more than an hour or two of vaguely dismal boredom. So yeah, guy's a bit crap.
Yeah, but boredom is what he craves now after his experience.
Yeah, it's nice. I thought that was another nice touch. But it's that thing again. It's another reality thing there. You've got a family member who's really proud of something that they suck at, but you can't just say, "Dude, that's crap." Oh yeah, what a nice one. Yeah, well done.
Yeah, it's the friend with the holiday slides, isn't it? It's that kind of.
That's
thing.
the one. That's precisely where I was going. Yeah, the holiday slides.
Yeah, this is the first volume. There's 580, and then we'll move on to volume 2.
This is the M62 services where we stop to have a bacon sandwich. And Marjorie, to use the bathroom. Here's the outside of the bathroom.
However, there's been a big change in his cousin, and I like the way he writes. He remembers him as a somewhat flabby youth, but very well dressed. And the man he sees before him now is this wild, unkempt figure, which I thought was quite stereotypical for an artist, wasn't it? The artistic genius is always bedraggled, looked like they've been pulled through a hedge backwards.
Yeah.
It was hard to recognise him now, for he had become lean, harsh, vehement, with an air of pride and penetration that was almost Luciferian. His unkempt mane of hair was already shot with white, and his eyes were electrically brilliant with a strange knowledge, and yet somehow were vaguely furtive, as if there dwelt behind them a morbid and macabre fear. A white streak in your hair, that's never a good sign, is it?
It's not, no. And like a shock of what hair with white in it. It's the classic occultist / mad scientist look, isn't it? It's almost like Doc Brown from Back to the Future, right? It's that wild eyes and crazed. So yeah, it's very visual. And I thought that, again, back to my thoughts about this being an adaptation, you could really run with that, couldn't you? You could have a sort of Doc Brown type, all wild-eyed and intense. It'd be really good.
Yeah, you can highlight that by having some sort of, I don't know, like a flashback, so you've seen him before the change as well.
Yeah, they could do a flashback at the beginning, couldn't they?
Yeah, just to really drive that home,
Yeah.
that change. Yeah. And this change in his appearance and manner is mirrored by the change in his work as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have these bland figures and dull busts anymore.
Although there is busts, but we'll get to that of a different kind.
Busty substances.
Yeah.
All around me were frenetic, murderous demons, satyrs mad with nympholepsy, ghouls that seemed to sniff the odours of the charnel, lamias voluptuously coiled about their victims, and less nameable things that belonged to the outland realms of evil myth and malign superstition. So he's gone sort of full Pickman here.
Yeah.
And these characters, they're outlandish, and yet they have a sort of air of realism around them as well.
Yeah, it is that sort of Pickman setup, but in the setup with he's the troubled artist with his nude model. That's straight out the Yellow Sign.
Oh yes, of course.
And obviously the like with the book and all that kind of the book of the Goya could be the King in Yellow play. So it's the setup with Cyprian and his model and their interaction and the way she's worried about his sanity and all this kind of stuff that really reminded me of that Chambers story.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that at all, but now you mention that, yeah, I see that. Yeah, that's a very nice parallel. And at this stage, are we thinking that the Goya book has got something to do with this?
I don't know. I think possibly, Yeah,
because it's sort of featured so far, and Goya's name comes up again later on. But we're not really getting anything from the cousin, no real specific sort of...
Vaguely. He says he's dabbled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was wondering here if it was the Goya, or perhaps he'd been rummaging in that same bookshop and found another tome.
Well, exactly. Maybe it was the old King in Yellow. Maybe he's seen the Yellow Sign. There you go. You never know.
And now we get this nice reversal, because Cyprian was the bland sculptor and Hussein was the occult, weird author and poet. But now we get, you might make something worthwhile out of your weird fiction, Philip. You are very clever and imaginative, of course, but you've never had any experience. I was startled and puzzled. Experience? What do you mean? So now there's this implication that Cyprian's work has changed because he's undergone some ritual or some sort of occult experience, and Hussein is the one who is dull and boring.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice sort of juxtaposition, and I've really liked this bit here because again you get that feeling of that he's crazed a little bit, don't you? Precisely that. You try to depict the occult and the supernatural without even most rudimentary first-hand knowledge of them. I tried to do something of the same sort in sculpture years ago without knowledge. And doubtless you recall the mediocre mess that I made of it, but I've learned a thing or two since then. You can always hear it in Vincent Price's voice, can't you? I've learned a thing or two since then.
Very good. Nice, yeah. And we can see that this pricks Hussein's pride a little bit, because he retorts, well, actually, I had an occult experience just now. And he explains this vision and describes the apparition he saw. And Cyprian's response to this is perhaps not what he expected. You are becoming more psychic than I imagined. Was your apparition anything like one of these? And he pulls aside this burlap sheet, and we get this group of figures revealed.
Dun, 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 dun. You hear the sting, right? Dun, 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 dun.
Oh yes. Before me, in a monstrous semicircle, were 7 creatures, who might all have been modelled from the loathly gargoyle that had confronted me across the folio of Goya drawings. Even in several that were still amorphous or incomplete, Cyprian had conveyed with a damnable art the peculiar mingling of primal bestiality and mortuary putrescence that had signalled the phantom.
Yeah, these 7 monstrosities are basically, they're hunting, aren't they? They're closing in on a cowering naked girl, and we're all clutching foully towards her with their hyena claws. The stark, frantic, insane terror on the face of the girl and the slavering hunger of her assailants were alike unbearable. Yeah, it's a very striking tableau, isn't it?
Yeah, and just the scale of it. I mean,
Yeah.
you think that's 7 or 8 life-size figures. That's quite a size. I was at Leeds Armoury Museums just a couple of weeks back, and they got a big tableau there of a sort of guy on horseback, I guess from an ancient Greek battle, fighting 4 or 5 guys with spears, and that took up a huge space. So, Cyprian must have a pretty big studio here.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, he must have a decently sized studio as well. So he must have been making a few quid out of his mediocre busts. Yeah. Mediocre busts, that's a band name.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Sort of art rock,
Yeah.
Kind of art rock stuff.
Yeah, maybe like a shoegaze.
Oh, shoegaze, yeah, shoegaze would work. Yeah, and Cyprian, obviously Hastain's kind of like, what the fuck is this? And a bit kind of freaked out by it. And Cyprian he's basically watching him, isn't he? Watching for reaction.
Yeah.
And he's like, how do you like my little pets? He inquired. I'm going to call them the composition, The Hunters from Beyond.
That's another Vincent Price voice, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? Yeah. How do you like my little pets? Yeah, absolutely.
And this is where we get our third character introduced. Before I could answer, a woman suddenly appeared from behind the Chinese screen. I saw that she was the model for the girl in the unfinished group. Evidently she had been dressing and was now ready to leave, for she wore a tailored suit and a smart toque. She was beautiful in a dark semi-Latin fashion, but her mouth was sullen and reluctant, and her wide liquid eyes were wells of strange terror as she gazed at Cyprian, myself, and the uncovered statue piece. So this is the model Marta, and it's already clear from the start she's not happy about this situation, and she's got some sort of concern for Cyprian.
Yeah, which again, this is the bit really that really reminds me of The Other Sign, because in that story, basically it's them two working, isn't it? But he's done this pit portrait of her and there's something wrong with it, and she basically looks dead by all accounts. And she's like, oh God, he's losing the plot. And they have that bit, don't they? That's sort of bit when she's just got dressed and then he starts freaking out about the guy with the worm fingers and all that. It's a very similar setup. And
yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's that sort of, the fin de siècle, that kind of feeling, isn't it? This could almost be in Paris or somewhere, couldn't it?
Well, we've already had mention in this story quite a few times of putrescence and charnel and decay, those sort of ideas which very much fit in with that.
Exactly, the yellow and all that, yeah.
And Cyprian doesn't introduce the girl at all, but she leaves. And then he says, that was Marta. She is half Irish, half Italian. A good model, but my new sculptures seem to be making her a little nervous. Then we get another classic Vincent Price line here, I think. He laughed abruptly with a mirthless, jarring note that was like the cachinnation of a sorcerer.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, and Hastain's he's really losing it by this point, isn't he? He's obviously failed his SAN role because he's had this experience down the road and then he's seen this, and obviously these creatures reminds him of what he's just seen. In God's name, what are you trying to do here? What does it all mean? Do such abominations really exist in earth or in any hell? I like that. Any hell. So there's multiple.
Yeah, and I thought what was interesting here was Hastain is putting this in supernatural terms, right? He's talking about lamias and satires and myth. But Cyprian goes into more of it's almost more of a cosmic explanation. He starts talking about other dimensions and other universes. It's more like that almost sci-fi explanation rather than the supernatural. And rather than soothe Hastain or give him some sort of comfort from this explanation, it just seems to make him worse. My desire to leave the studio became almost overwhelming, a mindless whirlwind panic that prompted me to run pell-mell from the room and down the stairs into the wholesome normality of the common 20th century streets. It seemed to me that the rays which fell through the skylight were not those of the sun, but of some darker orb, that the room was touched with unclean webs of shadow, where shadow should not have been. And I thought it was like that vision in the bookshop lifted the veil a little for him, and he was able to see what was beyond. And his cousin's explanation has lifted it even more, so now even more of this horrible truth has been revealed to him.
Yeah. I love that line that you read out just a second ago, because it's what separates it from being a supernatural story to being a cosmic horror story.
Yes.
It's that explanation that they're not some creature of myth and legend. They exist, but they exist on a plane that's different to ours. And that's something that I've tried to explain when when you get interviewed and people say, so what is cosmic horror? That there, that's it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yes, that's precisely it. Yeah. But it's like Hastane still clings to this occult thing of, have you made a pact with the devil? Sort of almost jokingly, and the cousin says, no, something far worse. I get the implication, it is far worse because this is true.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I opened the veil. I opened the way. I drew back the veil,
Well, Hastane manages to fight his panic and he does stay. You get the impression he's sort of listening blank-eyed as his cousin chunters on. And when it's polite enough, he says he's going to leave, he's got to go, he's got other things to do.
Yeah.
And this is where he meets Marta outside, and she expresses her concern for Cyprian.
Maybe you think me crazy, but I had to speak to you. I can't stand the way that things are going here, and I'd refuse to come to the place anymore if it wasn't that I like Cyprian so much. I don't know what he's done or what has been done to him, but he's altogether different from what he used to be. His new work is so horrible, you can't imagine how it frightens me. Yeah. She knows, doesn't she? But she doesn't quite know. I like that.
Yeah, she's had some experience, but maybe not quite the same as Cyprian, or not the same understanding. And I thought this is classic Lovecraftian stuff, isn't it, really? You can't come up against this stuff and remain unchanged.
No.
And again, that's replicated in Call of Cthulhu role-playing, right? Where the more you learn about the secrets, the worse it gets for you.
Yeah. Well, it's the classic Lovecraft quote, isn't it? We exist on placid islands of ignorance, and it's not, we're not meant to venture far. That's the whole point, isn't it? Once you see these things, that's it. Your worldview is shattered.
Yeah.
And you'll be in an asylum before you could say yogs are thoth,
Yeah, you can't unsee things.
Exactly, that's it.
You can't unknow them once the secret is revealed. Yeah. And Marta spends quite some time trying to persuade Hastane to speak to his cousin, to try and deter him from this course of action. She's really worried about him. And his response is pretty much, well, yeah, we're cousins, but I don't know him that well. He's not really going to take much notice of me. He sort of almost begrudgingly agrees to help her in the end. The girl must have pleaded and argued with me for many minutes in that deserted hall. Listening to her and trying to convince her of my inability to fulfill a request was like a dialogue in some futile and tedious nightmare. And I thought that was interesting, because it's as though the state of mind he's in, it feels like he's in a nightmare or some kind of weird dream.
Well, that's what I thought they could really play on if they did an adaptation, couldn't they? That sort of dreamlike quality. You'd shoot the whole thing in a slightly soft focus and make it kind of, that kind of, they used to do in the sort of like back in the old classic Ghost Stories for Christmas, M.R. James adaptations. They're all in that slightly soft focus. They all feel slightly unreal.
Yeah, that candle-lit atmosphere.
Yeah, and there's a big penumbra around the flame and all that kind of, you know exactly what I mean.
Yeah. So he gives Marta a sort of vague promise that, yeah, I'll have a word with my cousin, I'll see if I can help him out. And he goes back to his hotel. And that afternoon and evening, he can't shake off this feeling of oppression, of being watched, that something is going to spring out in him at any time. And this has really affected him, right? It's really got to him. He can't shake this feeling off.
Yeah. He takes to hanging out in cafes and theatres, doesn't he? wherever people thronged and lights were bright. Yeah, and only venturing back after midnight when he when he plucked up the courage to go back to his hotel room, kind of thing.
Yes, he does. And once there, he manages to go to sleep. He doesn't have any sort of dreams or nightmares that he remembers, but he does recall this sense of oppression, even in his deepest slumber. That feeling never leaves him. And when he awakes, it's noon, which I would imagine is quite unusual for him. And this is where we get our next jump scare, because as soon as he opens his eyes, bang, the first thing he sees is the creature at the foot of the bed staring at him.
You'd have the bit where it'd just open on his face and he'd roll over or something. Yeah.
The thing was standing at the foot of my bed, and behind it as I stared, the wall of the room, which was covered with a floral paper, dissolved in an infinite vista of greyness, teeming with ghoulish forms that emerged like monstrous misshapen bubbles from plains of undulant ooze and skies of serpentining vapour. It was another world. So this time we're getting not just the creature, but the world or the dimension that the creature inhabits as well. It's like this portal is getting bigger. This opening is expanding.
Yeah, you get that impression, almost like the Hounds of Tindalos, don't you? That once you see them, they've got your scent, and they're going to keep coming. Because each time he sort of sees them, they're more in our world, you know.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's little they're getting a bit closer, more tangible. Yeah, with each time he sees them. So yeah, that sort of hunting does remind me of the Hounds of Tindalos quite a lot, actually.
Yeah. And we very much get this sense of the willpower of the thing as well. It's drawing him into its world. I fought my vertigo, fought the sense that another will than mine was drawing me, that the unclean gargoyle was luring me by some unspeakable mesmeric spell, as a serpent is said to lure its prey. I seemed to read a nameless purpose in its yellow-slitted eyes, in the soundless moving of its oozy chancrous lips, and my very soul recoiled with nausea and revulsion as I breathed in its pestilential fetor. Some really lovely writing from Smith here as well. It's so vivid, isn't it?
Yeah, I thought that, like, when the plains of undulant ooze and skies of serpentining vapour. Even in the story set like contemporary, he can't resist getting his poetry hat on, can he? You know, but I think that's what elevates stories like this. I mean, yeah, because I've seen like critique of work of Smith and Lovecraft, and people are like, "Oh, it's very purple," like it's a bad thing.
You can't have too much purple, right?
No, exactly. I mean, the whole point is how vivid, and you can't get that kind of impression by just going, yeah, there was a void and a monster.
Exactly, yeah. It's the colours, the texture, the smell.
You've got to engage the senses, right?
Yeah. And I have to laugh here a bit because people obviously can't see us, but Tim has got a purple wall behind him.
Yes, I have.
And I've got a nice purple light shining on my Cthulhu backdrop.
Yeah, you can never have too much purple. Up until very recently, I had purple streaks in my hair.
Marvellous. Favourite shade of purple is the colour of an old bruise. Hastane asserts his will over this influence from the hunter, and that is enough to make the apparition fade. Not just the creature itself, but the whole background fades away into the wallpaper at his resistance. And then we get the telephone rings, and it's his cousin Cyprian. And this is where we get another nice change, because previously Cyprian was, well, virtually manic, but now his voice is flat, it's monotone. I sprang to answer the call. It was Cyprian, though I should hardly have recognised the dead, hopeless tones of his voice, from which the mad pride and self-assurance of the previous day had wholly vanished. I must see you at once, he said. Can you come to the studio? And Hastane doesn't really want to go, but Cyprian insists, and he explains that Marta has disappeared.
Yeah, ominous. We sort of think when you read accounts of like Hangman or things like that, because I've read like Pierpoint, like his memoirs. Something they always say is that on the morning, it's like when you talk to them, it's like all personality has been drawn out. It's that that, like you said, that sense of that hopelessness, that all hope is lost, it's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's just that acceptance, I guess, at that stage.
Yeah, it's that resignation, isn't it? And
Yeah.
yes, imagine you hear that on the phone, you'd be like, "Oh crap!"
Yes, indeed, yeah. And I guess it's the verbal equivalent of that 1,000-yard
It is,
stare.
yeah.
You know, you see that in old war footage,
Yeah.
didn't you? It's a horrible thing to see.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Yeah, very similar thing to people with like PTSD, shell shock, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So, of course, Hastane rushes round there. I like this little bit that he didn't even stop for breakfast. Yeah, didn't stop to have some kippers and some scrambled eggs, maybe, you know.
Well, we've already worked out in previous stories that Hastane is a chap, right?
Oh,
he's in tweed.
totally. Absolutely.
So, of course, he would go and have breakfast and, read the morning paper before heading out.
Yeah, there's no need to rush, is there? Yeah. And Jerry, he discovers Cyprian in this very strange state. I like the way he describes it. His look was that of a man who had been stunned by the blow of some crushing weapon or had gazed on the very face of Medusa. Like a charged machine, as if his body rather than his mind was speaking, he began at once to pour forth the atrocious narrative. They took her, he said simply. Maybe you didn't know it or weren't sure of it, but I've been doing all my new sculptures from life. So there we get our Pickman-esque confirmation that these things are not of the imagination.
Yeah.
And he explains, or he doesn't quite explain how he's done it, but he explains that he gained the ability to summon these things, but he was becoming more and more nervous of them, more and more afraid of them, and they seemed to be becoming more and more emboldened. They'd linger when he ordered them to leave, and sometimes they'd appear when he didn't want them. And then he gets to the events of Marta's disappearance. I wasn't even looking at Marta when suddenly I knew that the things were there. The smell told me, if nothing else. They were surrounding Marta, were crowding and jostling each other, were all reaching towards her with their filthy talons. But even then I didn't think they could harm her. They aren't material beings in the sense that we are, and they really have no physical power outside of their own plane. All that they do have is a sort of snaky mesmerism. So again, that implication that they're trying to lure you into their world. And also this idea that they're almost sort of timid at first and they gradually become emboldened. It's like they're pushing each time to get a little bit further on, a little bit further in our world.
Yeah. Well, you get it with rats and things like that, right? Because rats are very, very hesitant to come out into the light or whatever, but you leave some food or whatever, you'll see, they'll come out and look at it and then they'll back away again. Then they'll come out a bit further and look at it, then back away again. And then they'll come out and go for it, and that's when the trap springs. But it's that thing, isn't it? It's that sort of wary predator.
Yeah, and we know they're predators. I mean, he's even called them hunters, right?
Absolutely.
And I mean, just look at their canines, their claws, and all the rest of it. Yeah, and now they've managed to get Marta, not Carter, Marta.
Yeah. Yeah. Something else I thought of here. When he was saying about that they lingered when he'd ordered them to leave, it reminded me of that the line in Case of Charles Dexter Ward: "Do not call up something that you cannot put down." Yes,
exactly. Yep. And this is the age-old story, right, of people meddling with things that they shouldn't.
Exactly.
And this is where curiosity leads you, right? He's pulled back the curtains to look at things that mankind should never be looking at, and now he's paid the price. Or to be more accurate, Marta's paid the price.
Yeah.
And you get the impression here, and that's certainly bolstered later on, that in some sense she has sacrificed herself in order to save him.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously she basically alluded to the fact that she was in love with him. And you do get that kind of impression that she sort of offered herself up as meat almost to save him. But yeah.
Grim, yeah. And we get this very vivid and disturbing description of Cyprian, of what he saw.
Mm-hmm.
For a moment the studio wasn't there at all, only a long grey oozing plain, beneath skies where the fumes of hell were writhing like a million ghostly and distorted dragons. Marta was sinking into that ooze, and the things were all about her, were gathering in fresh hundreds from every side, were fighting each other for place, were sinking with her like bloated, misshapen fen creatures into their native slime. Then everything vanished, and I was standing here in the studio alone with these damned sculptures. So again, that's like a full-on opening of the portal, a real glimpse into their world that Marta has now been completely drawn into.
It is. It's incredibly visual again, isn't it? It's something that you can picture in your head. Well, I did when I was reading it, you know. I think that's sort of one of the beauties of Smith's writing, you know. He's got all the bits there for your brain to just visualize.
Yes, very cinematic, isn't it? Yeah, in that sense. So Cyprian now explains a little bit about his motivations for the work he's been doing. I wanted to do in sculpture what Poe and Lovecraft and Baudelaire have done in literature, what Rops and Goya did in pictorial art. So another reference to Goya there, and it's nice that he's mentioned his buddy alongside Poe as well. I think HPL would have been very pleased with that.
Yeah, and this is where we get the sort of the vague explanation. That was what led me into the occult. When I realized my limitations, I knew that I had to see the dwellers of the invisible worlds before I could depict them. I wanted to do it. I longed for this power of vision and representation more than anything else. And then, all at once, I found that I had the power of summoning the unseen. There was no magic involved in the usual sense of the word. No spells and circles, no pentacles and burning gums from old sorcery books. At bottom, it was just willpower, I guess. A will to divine the satanic, to summon the innumerable malignancies and grotesqueries that people other planes than ours or mingle unperceived with humanity.
So this is very interesting, right? Because in this type of story, your expectation would be, right, he's gone to the bookshop down the road, he's found some strange grimoire, he's rolled back his carpet, he's drawn the circle, and through doing that, he's learnt to summon these things.
Yeah.
Yet his explanation is that all of this was achieved purely by willpower. Yeah. And not just these creatures, not just the hunters, but everything in the studio, he says, is sculpted from life or from recent memory. So your vampires, your lamias, your satyrs, and all the rest of it. And we get more talk of elementals and parallel worlds. These places and dimensions and worlds that exist alongside of our own and in our own. And there's this idea that when you see these creatures, there's perhaps this thinning of the veil or the thinning of the barrier. It sort of breaks down a little bit, and that's how you get to see your vampires.
Yeah.
Maybe they have the power to cross over into our world as these things do. And all this achieved purely through his willpower.
Yeah. Again, back to Lovecraft, those places in the dark corners of the world where the border between realities is thin. You know, that's something I've always liked playing with, because I mean, you could do that anywhere, right? You could have a thinning of reality in a bathroom or in the back room of a sex shop or anywhere you like, you know,
like the Lovecraft store in Tottenham Court Road.
Yeah.
And I thought what the interesting thing about that as well is that this takes place in we're in San Francisco, we're in a bookshop on presumably a main street. You can hear the traffic outside, there's people walking past. You can probably hear the ringing of the tram bells and all that kind of stuff. You know, we're smack in the middle of the modern day at the time, busy urban environment, whereas this kind of story or encounter normally takes place. It's either a sort of decrepit cellar, like in Pickman's model, or in some sort of grove or haunted castle or weird mansion or something. You know, yeah. So Smith really brings this stuff right into the here and now.
Yeah, it reminded me a little bit of Henry Kuttner's The Salem Horror in that respect, because again, that's in the middle of this bustling town. It's just, you know, he's found this odd little room in his house, and you know, insanity ensues. But yeah, I like. The thing is, I love it when people do that, when they put it in the most sort of mundane and ordinary everyday places. And that's one thing that's always attracted me to cosmic horror, is the fact that you can do that. You know, you don't have to be, you know, you can't stick a mummy in Tesco's. You're going to have to go to a pyramid, aren't you, right? Some tentacled abomination in the storeroom that's come out of some void. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'm reading that.
Yeah.
Which in a way takes us back to The King in Yellow again, where the guy's being pursued through Paris. What was the story? The
Court of the Dragon. Yeah,
that's it. That's it. Yeah. Where he's in contemporary Paris, or the Paris of his time, yet there's something there that is totally alien, and he's hunting him through the streets. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the thinking about the way he's done it, almost like willpower. It brings to mind. Do you remember them magic eye pictures?
Oh yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
where you had to sit and try and get your eyes to go wonky, and so you could focus, and you'd see this image below this sort of pattern.
Yeah, I could never see him. I
can't do them. I've never managed. No, I've never managed to do it. I always put it down because I've got astigmatism in my left eye, so I've always put it down to that. But
right.
I don't know. I just can't do it.
No, me neither. Yeah, but I see what you mean with that. It's like if you stare at it for long enough and hard enough, it shifts and it changes into something else. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's like I did a story a while ago. One of the first short stories I wrote, actually, it was about when you like a towel falls off the door, right? And you're sitting there on the bog and you're looking at it. And after a couple of minutes, you'll start seeing faces in it.
Yeah.
Especially if you're tired or whatever, you just woke up in the middle of the night for a slash and you're looking at this towel and you'll start seeing these grotesque faces in it, But then you move to a slightly different angle and they're gone again. And, it's almost like that, isn't it? It's like I get this image of him sitting there in the studio just staring at the wall and then wallop. It dissolves, yeah.
Yeah, because it's like the classic pareidolia is where you see the faces, right?
Mm.
But this is something beyond that. So then you get into thinking, is reality as we perceive it just the illusion? And if we stare at that long enough, can we break that down?
Oh, we're in full on metaphysics now.
Well, I did study metaphysics at the Miskatonic,
Ah, nice.
I was expelled after certain experiments went a little bit wrong, but we won't talk about that.
I took the cookery course. That was disturbing.
Not the butchery one, then. With your
well, I did do that as well.
Excellent.
Indeed. Butchery, fishmongery, Miskatonic, that takes on a whole new meaning.
Oh, it does, yes. All useful skills if you're hanging around in Innsmouth. So, yeah, it potentially raises a lot of interesting thoughts. I mean, I'm thinking like Buddhism as well, where, reality is an illusion, and you break away from it by retreating into yourself, by carrying out intensive meditation practices. Yeah. Is that a similar thing, a similar idea? You're going beyond the veil. There's a lot of interesting parallels in there, I think.
There is, which also, again, brings us round to the Hounds of Tindalos.
Yes,
because that was very inspired by sort of Taoist.
Yeah, Liao, wasn't it?
Liao, indeed, yeah.
And if we look at it from the scientific aspect, then we're back in From Beyond territory, right? Where the scientist makes the resonator in order to see into this parallel dimension and all the creatures that live there.
And then we're back to the great god Pan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're gone full circle. And current science is talking about this, right? You see, I should preface that by saying that my science knowledge you could write on the back of a postage stamp pretty much. I think we're both in the same boat as far as that goes.
Yep, absolutely.
But, you do see things. There is discussion of parallel universes and multi-dimensions.
Many worlds theory and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So it's all very interesting. I mean, just imagine there could be another world where we're bank managers or something.
That'd be really disturbing, wouldn't it?
That's the true horror.
That is the true horror, blimey.
I mean, no disrespect to any bank managers out there.
Go to a parallel universe and find out that you're a Tory MP.
Oh, let's not go there.
Got that, but
And Cyprian talks about how he imposed his willpower on these creatures, on the hunters.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if they sort of let him a bit at first. They let him think that in order to gain access to our world.
Well, I got that. I definitely got that impression with the fact that they were there and they would go away, but then they were pushing their luck a little bit. It's that sort of, it's very animal, isn't it? It's like a cat. You shoo a cat away from your food and it'll come a bit closer and a bit closer, and then it'll run away again.
Yeah. And if you think of the canine aspect of the ghouls, right? They say that's how dogs were domesticated, They gradually get closer and closer to the fire, get a few scraps of food, next thing, they're domesticated.
Oh, yeah.
And we get a little bit more here about his motivations and also what are now his regrets. To think of Marta in their power, it is worse than hell or madness. Marta loved me and I loved her too, though I didn't have the sense to realise it, wrapped as I was in my dark, baleful ambition and impious egotism. She was afraid for me, and I believe she surrendered voluntarily to the things. She must have thought that they would leave me alone if they secured another victim in my place. So that confirms earlier what we said about Marta sacrificing herself, isn't it?
Mm.
Plus that idea, which is quite a common theme, as we said before, of pride before the fall.
Yeah, it's like hubris, isn't it? It's always in these stories, there's an element of hubris, isn't it? You know?
Yeah, yeah. And then we get one more, I suppose it's a sort of jump scare, because Marta suddenly reappears.
Mm.
And that brings some hope that there might be a happy ending, but of course, this is one of those dark, ironic twists that Smith enjoys so much.
Yeah. She was nude except for a Spanish shawl that she must have worn while posing. Her face was bloodless as the marble of a tomb, and her eyes were wide and blank, as if she had been drained of all life, of all thought or emotion or memory, as if even the knowledge of horror had been taken away from her. It was the face of the living dead, the soulless mask of ultimate idiocy, and the joy faded from Cyprian's eyes as he stepped towards her. Yeah.
So that spark of joy is immediately extinguished when he discovers what she's become, basically a shell of a person, really.
Yeah.
And I thought this was interesting that she's returned physically unharmed, despite all this talk of slavering jaws and grabbing claws and everything. But this is something that Cyprian had acknowledged earlier. Bodies aren't what they want. It isn't for human flesh that they grope with those ghoulish claws and gape and slaver with those gangrenous mouths. The brain itself, and the soul too, is their food. They are the creatures who prey on the minds of madmen and madwomen, who devour the disembodied spirits that have fallen from the cycles of incarnation, have gone down beyond the possibility of rebirth. Now, I sort of missed this the first time round reading, but...
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Reincarnation and rebirth? We spoke a little bit about Buddhism earlier. This would seem to tie in with some of those beliefs as well again.
Again, quite like the hounds, right? Because yeah.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the journey back through past lives to the beginnings, wasn't it, in that? And I think it's interesting, again, we see from Smith here, this mixture. We've got superstition and myth, because there's satyrs and vampires and lamias.
But it's given them a scientific reason. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's no occult ritual to some of these things. It's the appliance of science, isn't it? And then you get this added element, I guess you call it like a religious or a spiritual element almost. So it's a very interesting blend of these three things. He doesn't just rely on one to tell the story.
Yeah, like Long with the Hounds of Tindalos, Lovecraft would never have done that.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what made that story different to the just being an out and out pastiche of what Lovecraft did. And it's the same here, because it's got Smith has injected in like so much of his own sort of personality almost into it that it elevates it above straight pastiche, you know.
Yeah, I can't imagine Lovecraft using that mechanic, that idea of reincarnation, in anything.
Reincarnation, no.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't think of any story where he uses it. I don't think it's something he was into. Robert E. Howard, on the other hand, well, he uses that a lot, right? In his stories, there's a lot of past life regression.
Oh, well, there's that one where some guy regresses back to being Conan or something, isn't there?
Yes, Conan of the Reavers. Yeah.
I can't remember the name of it.
I think it's People of the Dark.
That's it. That's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, it's like one of the Worms of the Earth series, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It's that horror sword and sorcery, isn't it? It's yeah.
Yeah, and even in his sword and sorcery stories, I mean, there's a Conan story, The People of the Black Circle, where the princess that he's trying to rescue is taken prisoner by the sort of head sorcerer,
right.
And he regresses her through these past lives. She sees herself going back and back and back, Again, pretty much all the way to the primordial ooze.
Nice.
So that concept was certainly something that was floating around the Lovecraft circle at the time, but I honestly can't think of Lovecraft using it.
No, off the top of my head. I mean, he does a lot of things about ancestors, but it's more of like just a blood thing, isn't it? Rather than like a spiritual reincarnation.
Yeah, it's more like a devolution.
Yeah, it's more of a connection. Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. We get this final scene of, well, it's really quite grim, quite chilling, where Cyprian takes Marta in his arms and speaks to her, but she made no answer, no movement of recognition or awareness, but stared beyond him with her blank eyes, to which the daylight and the darkness, the void air and her lover's face, would henceforth be the same. He and I both knew in an instant that she would never again respond to any human voice or to human love or terror, that she was like an empty cerement, retaining the outward form of that which the worms have eaten in their mausolean darkness. Mausolean darkness. Oh,
yeah, that's a goth band. That's a goth band name right there. Mausolean Darkness.
Oh, it is, isn't it? Yes, Mausolean Darkness. Marvellous.
Yeah. Well, I thought there's two in that one sentence there. Another band name, Empty Cerement.
That'd be the album. Empty Cerement by Mausoleum Darkness, available now. And this revelation triggers Hastane into another vision, or there's another opening of the veil.
Yeah.
Because we read that the room seemed to recede, the walls and floors dissolved in a seething, unfathomable gulf, amid whose pestilential vapours the statues were mingled in momentary and loathsome ambiguity. So, again, it's this idea of the abyss is opened up and is staring into it.
Yeah, and it's not the abyss that's staring back at him, it's a load of hungry hunters, you know. The ravening faces, the hunger-contorted forms that swirled towards us from their ultra-dimensional limbo like a devil-laden hurricane from Malabouge. Nice.
It's just a brief vision this time. It fades away. And all that Cyprian can do is his last act in the story is to turn away. He snatches up a heavy sculptor's mallet from the table on which it was lying and proceeded to smash with furious blows the newly modelled group of gargoyles, till nothing was left but the figure of the terror-maddened girl crouching above a mass of cloddish fragments and formless, half-dried clay. So that's basically all he can do at this point. The only action he can take is to smash these statues.
Yeah.
And you wonder, will that stop them coming through again? Is that enough to stop them? Or do they even want to come through again?
Possibly.
You know.
Yeah. Who knows? Yeah. I thought that was a really nice way to end it. See, that's like, because that was his revision ending, right? So it'd be interesting to see what he did before, because I find that quite impactful. It's just despair, isn't it? There's nothing else that can be done.
Yeah, there's absolutely no hope of recovery, or even though Marta is back, she's changed forever. And is just left with must be like a seething frustration, and this is all the result of his own pride, really. And I think if this had been a Robert E. Howard story, well, that portal was open. He would have jumped in there with his broadsword, right?
Hacking heads off left, right, and centre. Yeah.
And in this, you might say it's kind of a happy ending, in that he got Marta back in a way.
It's a hollow victory, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So that's our story done, and as always, we'll turn now to Dawnwood Spire and Lonely Hill, the letters of H.P. Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, 1922 to 1931. This is a marvellous collection of their correspondence, edited by David E. Schultz and S.T. Joshi. And I think, as we normally say, we read little bits out on the show here, and we occasionally do a bonus episode on this book. But we're just touching the tip of the iceberg. There's so much in this book. We really do recommend it for anyone interested in either of these writers. There's some fascinating stuff. Now, when it comes to this particular story, there aren't a lot of mentions. Just the usual line here and there about, oh, I see Wright rejected it again. But we do get one or two interesting bits. And I think, as usual, half the reason I enjoy reading these bits out is for the return addresses as much as anything else.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. This is a constant highlight for me, these ridiculous return addresses.
All right, well, here we go. This is Lovecraft to Smith, 26th of July 1932. Precipice of an hoe above the nameless abysm, hour of the murmur from below.
Murmur. That's a story title right there.
Oh, isn't it just? Isn't it just? Yeah. And Lovecraft wrote, "Many thanks for sending me the manuscript with your new tale. I shall peruse it with the keenest interest when it arrives. Too bad Brother Hugo stuck a tawdry new title on, but glad there were no mutilations, except unintentional ones. Bates has just ruined a story of Sonny Belknap's by wanton excisions. By the way, the kid wants me to ask you whether you've received your cheque for the Hunters. He is worried because his hasn't come. I haven't had the chance to read Strange Tales yet, but hope the Hunters hasn't suffered much change from the manuscript form in which I recall it. The cover design is certainly impressive enough. You are rapidly taking rank as the leading star in the constellation of weird and science fiction." And here we get a mention of another member of the Lovecraft Circle. "By the way, I've recently come into touch with Hugh B. Cave, whom I have long known to be a Rhode Islander because of his contributions to local papers.
Yep.
He wants me to join a new organisation of pulp writers, the American Fiction Guild, but I shan't on account of the $10 annual dues. I'd get nothing out of it." So I thought that was nice there. Well, there's a few interesting things there. One is long, saying he's not been paid yet, trying to chase up his money.
Nothing changes. I get that emails like that all the time. Have you had your royalties for this anthology yet? You know?
Yes, the never-ending cry of the writer. And I thought it was nice here that he really does give some props to Smith, doesn't he, as well?
Yeah. That's high praise coming from HPL, right?
Oh, yeah. He wasn't one to stint on criticism, was he?
No, he can be downright brutal. Like, in his critique of things, he could be downright brutal.
Mm. And the other thing I really like with this letter, which I didn't mention, is the fact that Lovecraft is writing this while he's on a visit to ancient Newport, as he describes it, and he's actually writing, the heading is "On the Wharf, 5:30 p.m. So we've got this lovely image of HPL sitting on the wharf at Newport on a sort of summer's evening, writing a letter to his friend. And it just struck me out, you know, he'd just sit down and write anywhere, anytime, on anything he could get hold of. I mean, some of his letters are on the back of menus and stuff like that, I think.
It's interesting how times change, isn't it? Because you're waiting for the bus now, you whip your phone out and go check Facebook, you know?
Exactly, yeah. Look at your messages and all that. I wonder how HBO and Co would have used that. I think they would have liked that.
And I like the reference to Hugh B. Cave. We have to cover some of his stuff at some point. I've read a few of his stories because they're in a lot of the like Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos and New Tales and some of the Chaosium Cycle books. There's some good ones out there.
Yeah, we should line up an episode of IBC on him because we're not covered him at all, have we?
No.
And then we get just one more mention a couple of weeks later. So this is dated early August 1932. And our address now from Lovecraft is Shumath Goon, hour of the flight of the bat toward the black nebula.
Shumath Goon.
Yes, Shumath Goon.
I like it. That's awesome.
And here Lovecraft writes, "Too bad Wright returned a star change, but I trust it may find a berth in one of the science fictions. If not, I certainly must see it in manuscript. Glad the Hunters escaped with minor misprints. No, Belknap hasn't received his cheque yet and is consequently somewhat fretful. According to Whitehead, the prospects of payments are sound enough, though delay is inevitable." Same old story again.
Well, it's the same. Like saying, as more things change, the more they stay the same. It's no different now with independent press and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
It's just the way it goes, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it's the eternal cry of the artist, isn't it? Waiting to get paid, hoping you'll get paid.
Yeah.
And I guess post-pandemic has made that worse.
Well, you got a cost of living crisis and all that kind of business. Well, it's no real different to back then, right? Great Depression and all that kind of stuff, you know?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were staring that in the face, weren't they? The 20s into the 30s, yeah, for a very hard time.
Yeah, the interwar years weren't exactly prosperous, were they? So
No. So folks, that about wraps things up for today. As usual, if you have any comments, questions, suggestions, corrections, particularly of pronunciations, then do let us know via the usual channels, our Facebook page, YouTube, our Patreon site, and of course you can always drop us an email at innsmouthbookclub@outlook.com. Before we do finish, there's just a couple of quick things we'd like to mention. The first is that the Innsmouth Gold Redbubble store is finally open. There's a range of merch on there featuring some very nice exclusive designs, so please do go and take a look. We'll put the link in the show notes, and do check back regularly because we will be updating that as often as possible. We need to get some Strange Shadows designs up. We haven't got any of those yet, so that's certainly something in the pipeline. The other thing is we've had a couple of queries in from patrons about RSS feeds. Now, a bit like the science thing earlier, we have to preface this by saying that neither Tim or myself are particularly au fait with all this modern, newfangled streaming services and everything. So I have very little clue of how RSS works. I don't think either of us particularly use streaming services, but we are looking into it. It does take a bit of time. Patreon, their help system, is not the fastest, let's put it like that.
You find with all these platforms, though, responses are bloody glacial. You know, you send an email, you might get a response within the week. It may take a couple before they actually do anything about it. Yeah,
that's true. And we have no direct access to the RSS or anything like that. It all goes through Patreon as far as I can see. But yeah, some are better than others. I mean, YouTube has always been good, I've found, for complaints and inquiries. But
Amazon are an absolute nightmare. Let's just put that out there.
Yeah, so please do bear with us. We are working on it. Oh, and speaking of the streaming services, I understand that people can leave reviews on those as well. So any reviews you'd like to leave us on Spotify or Apple would be greatly appreciated. And if there is an expert out there amongst our listenership who could explain all this to us, you need to explain it like you're talking to two 10-year-olds.
Which we are in many ways mentally.
Well, yeah. Yes, there is an element of truth in that. Now, one thing Patreon does do very well is give you the opportunity to support the show, and you can do so at 3 tiers of membership. You get bonus content for Strange Shadows and the Innsmouth Book Club. You get a quarterly copy of Innsmouth News, and now you'll also get a discount on Innsmouth Gold merchandise. So please do check out the Patreon site for that. And a big thanks as always to our existing patrons, subscribers, and everyone who follows us on the YouTube channel. So that's our last story for this season. What we're going to do next time is do a sort of wrap up and overview of season 2 before we take a little break for Christmas, then plunge into season 3 in the new year. Thanks very much again for listening, and with that it's goodbye from me, Rob Peyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.